And forget the politics. There are really big issues in education. COVID overhang psychologically, trying to build back something better, issues over buildings and staff and falling roles, the Ofsted debate about standards and assessment, a lot of stress and frustration out there flaring up all over the place with some big ticket shortages opening up. But our ship, if I can use a corny image, we've stayed afloat. And you'll see that we're a tight ship. We actually have not got a deficit in the last year. We work hard not to be a drain on the major parish share activities of the diocese. And you will see that it's a tight ship. Now, that's a matter of luck as well as judgment, but we do aim to serve the diocese as best we can financially, if in any other way. There's an education community of over 250,000 that we serve directly in the Thames Valley. Don't let people say we don't know any children and young people. We have a huge fund of children and young people. We need to learn how to talk with them and listen to them better, perhaps, but they are out there. And many people talk about America being religious and English is secular. In America, they have big rows over prayer in public schools. There's even a school board in Utah that banned the Bible this last week from its schools because it was full of so much sex and violence. Well, in the UK, we have a completely different situation. As the Church of England and as the Diocese of Oxford, we have access to every aspect of education at every phase, from playgroups to research universities and, of course, schools. We're on the passenger deck, we're in the hold, we're in the engine room, we're on the bridge. Please, if you have that access, use it well and serve the institution that you're part of to support your local school or college or academy trust or educators in your congregations. Every congregation in our diocese has a significant number of educators or formula educators in it. How do we stay afloat? Thanks to the staff. Tony is incredible. Thanks to our wonderful staff of deputies and advisors. Thank you to Bishop Stephen, to have a bishop who gets it and is fully behind what we're doing. That isn't always the case in all 42 dioceses. That really puts an enormous amount of lead in our pencil. Our stress is on service, not control, doing all we can for the children we serve, families and schools, innovative work on chaplaincy, all the things that are starting up as well as the things we've historically done. So it's my pleasure and privilege to turn over to Tony to put some flesh on the bare bones that I've outlined.
Thank you very much indeed, Bishop Allen, and thank you also again to Bishop Stephen for that wonderful link into the next 20 minutes or so. And thank you, Synod, once again for both inviting me along this morning to talk to you and also for the support that many of you have given to the Diocesan Board of Education, its work in our schools. I have a short presentation which I'm going to ask now to load up. Thank you very much, Stephen. And as with previous presentations, you see that I've hopefully sort of punctuated it with some lovely images of some of our schools and indeed colleges at work. And my opening slide there shows a Space Makers activity at Idstone Church of England Primary School in Bucks. And you can see they're taking part in something called mending. And in many ways, that's a wonderful image for the Diocesan Board of Education to use, because not only is it all about children and focus on children communicating with each other, facilitated by obviously by the adult there, but you can see the interlocking and interweaving threads that those children have got. And in many ways, that is what we are. We are in a thread or a web across the diocese, linking and connecting with schools and with colleges and with churches. Next slide, please. So I've always, I suppose, been an apologist for the fact that we are dominated in both the Diocesan Board of Education and the world of education, as indeed the Church of England is, with acronyms. So a brief sort of rundown there of some of the acronyms that we've got. There won't be a test at the end, but I thought it might be helpful. Some of the ones you won't be familiar with are, for example, the one NPQs, National Professional Qualifications, and I'll talk more about that when we get to it. Others you'll be probably a little bit more familiar with. But the image there you can see is of our wonderful annual service, which took place in Christchurch for the first time in 4.5 years back in November. And what was great about it was not only did it involve so many children, but in terms of being there and participating, but you can see there the cross being carried by a student from the Oxford Academy. And I think that was a wonderful occasion all round. And I thought it was a fitting page perhaps to use for some of our acronyms. Next slide, please. So I've divided this into sort of three main strands, I suppose. Leadership engagement, I think, was a really helpful sort of turn to utilise, because that's all about the sort of big picture, and we are in this unique position of influence, not necessarily control, across the piece. And in particular, you'll be aware, because I referenced it last year, there was supposed to be a schools bill. In fact, there was a schools bill. It just never made its way through the legislative framework. But the white paper, Opportunity for All, still exists. It's still a thing. And there is still certainly a statement on the part of the current government that they envisaged an entirely academised system. The notional date of 2030 has disappeared. But certainly, to quote Lord Jim Knight, the erstwhile Minister of State for Schools, who is not a member of the current government, but was a member of the previous government, the tipping point has been passed. Majority of schools across the country are actually already academies. So we've produced a strategy which we feel is responsive, is empowering, doesn't have targets in there, doesn't have notional ideas of how many schools and by what time, but gives a real flavour, I think, of where we would want to go with supporting schools in terms of their discussions and journeys around academisation. Our service level agreement is taken up by the vast majority of our schools, and indeed some of the schools that aren't church schools utilise that, and that's important. One, because it means that we've got an automatic presence within those schools through the SLA that we're supporting them, but also more pertinently, it's a significant generator for us in terms of our own income. A new development since this time last year is that we now have 4 further education chaplaincies in place, and I think that's incredible because there hasn't historically been a place for schools for the church within FE colleges. So to have those very embryonic chaplaincies in place, particularly at a time of acute need, I think is really important. And I mentioned on the earlier picture there our Space Maker programme, which continues to go from strength to strength and to broaden its remit. And we continue to roll that out very much in an invitational manner based upon individual schools, but certainly on a systematised basis as well. And I've already made reference to it, but over half our income is self-generated, and Bishop Allen very kindly made reference to this in his opening introduction, that we're not reliant upon parish share in order to be able to fund ourselves. We very much look to generate our own income, and not just from our schools, but through commercial services as well. Next slide, please. Wonderful image there from St Edward's Royal Free Ecumenical School in Windsor. This is one of 2 ecumenical schools. It's the only one that we work in conjunction with our Catholic colleagues. And there you can see Bishop Philip, who is the Catholic Diocese of Portsmouth Bishop, and obviously our own Bishop Stephen, signing a wonderful document which really establishes what it is to be an ecumenical school and the power of working in an ecumenical way. And that was a great event last November, and that's obviously overseen by a delighted Neil Adamson, who is the head teacher there. Next slide, please. So I'll move on now to quality and delivery. I suppose this is the sort of the engine room really of the DBE. It includes quite a lot of sort of matrices and metrics, I should say, by which we're judged. Bishop Allen and indeed also Bishop Stephen have already referenced Ofsted, and this may well come up in questions, I'm sure. But you know, Ofsted is the regulator, and we're delighted that over 93% of our schools are categorised or as outstanding or good. Obviously, we'd be even more delighted if 100% of them were categorised or outstanding or good. But in essence, this is well above the national average. The national average is around about 86%. So again, that's a credit to our school leaders, our governors, and our communities to have a figure which is well in excess of what it is nationally. And then, as you're aware, SIAMS, the Statutory Inspection of Anglican and Methodist Schools, is effectively, I mean, sometimes people describe as Ofsted for church schools, and it's so much more than that. But it is, again, the regulator by which the effectiveness of church schools are judged. And of those inspected in the new framework, all of them have been judged excellent or good. So we're delighted with that. We'll move on at the end of my presentation to talk about the future for SIAMS, which I think is quite exciting. But in the current framework, we've got that very high bar that we've had there. There's been a significant churn of head teacher vacancies. We work with 285 schools, and 42 of them in the last year have changed their head teacher. Now, some of those might be because of retirement, some of them might be because of promotion or going to a bigger school, but that's a significant number. It's the highest it's been, certainly in my time in this role, but I think a number of our colleagues as well. We've restyled our governance offer to schools, and that's been taken up by a significant number. It's something called Governance Plus, which is entirely online to fit in with governors' busy lives and the fact that they are volunteers, and also links into our service level agreement. And last year, and we've got our next one on Tuesday this week, we had over 50 head teachers at our annual Headspace conference. Possibly having the national treasure, that is the Reverend Richard Coles, was a big draw, but also we had colleagues from the diocese as well delivering at that. Polly Faulkner, for example, was one of those who gave an inspirational keynote speech. So we very much look to work with our heads in a very collegiate and collaborative way. Next slide, please. And there you got the Reverend Charlie Kerr, who you'll be hearing from a little bit later today, doing some space makers training, again, one of our Church of England academies. That's John Henry Newman Church of England Academy, which is part of ODST, the Oxford Diocesan Schools Trust. Next slide, please. So development support, I've already made reference to our two diocesan MATs, ODST, which is the more established and the larger, which covers the whole of Oxfordshire, but also significant parts of what used to be the County of Berkshire, is still the County of Berkshire, but the local authorities that serve it. And ODBST, which is a smaller one, which covers off Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, and they continue to grow. ODBST has got a significant number of schools in what we would call their growth pipeline. ODST is very much in a consolidation phase, but again is open to look at the opportunity for schools to join it. And ODST is by far the largest in terms of numbers of academies of all of the MATs that we work with. And finally, St John's Church of England Primary School, all through school, is due to open at the Grove Airfield site in September. And as I say, that will be the last of our free schools that we've got in the pipeline. And the other one that has opened earlier this year was St Cecilia's Church of England Primary School, which opened actually 6 months early to take account of demand and need in the area of Wokingham that it serves. You will have heard, I know, quite a bit around the work that we've done around carbon net zero. So all of the schools which are voluntary aided, all of the schools in our two diocesan MATs have had an audit which took place last year, and that's helped them decide how they can spend the enormous allocation of circa £15,000 per school, but more pertinently, how we can bid for new funding to ensure that they work towards a target that the Church of England has set of 2030 of being carbon net zero, and we as a diocese have been somewhat more pragmatic around 2035. And you can see there, one of the ways in which we can do that is to support our voluntary aided and academy schools to utilise nearly £5 million of DFE school capital allocation. Next slide, please. And there you've got what I've called a drone's eye view of our Church of England Academy there on that airfield site. This will, let's say, be an all-through school. So it'll open initially to reception and Year 1 children, with Year 7 children starting the school for the first time in September 2024. And that's a really exciting development, together with the Vale Academy Trust, which are based just down the road in Wantage, at the convent site, actually. Thank you. Next slide, please. So looking to the future, and I think this is important really, because when I did this presentation last year, it was interesting how most of the things that I said I thought would happen have come to pass, albeit the Academies Bill, the Schools Bill was not one of those. But I think it's important to flag these up really. First of all, I've mentioned already that there will be a new inspection framework for SciAMs, and this will move away from the 4 judgments, which very much sort of mirror Ofsted, to being one simple judgment around, is the school an effective Church of England school or not? And in particular, it will focus on the role not only of the Diocesan Board of Education, but in a landscape which is increasingly driven by multi-academy trusts. What is the role of the trust in ensuring the Christian character and distinctiveness of that particular school? And I welcome this, because it moves away, although it may, you might say, because it's a binary judgment, it perhaps makes it even harder edge, more of a cliff edge. I actually think that the way in which the reports framework is structured enables schools to very much give much more of a narrative account of their journey so far that's taken them to that point, and also what they need to do to continue to improve. The Church of England's Education Office, which we continue to work closely with, has published some initial documents around the idea of what a flourishing system looks like, and takes account of some of the things that we've already talked about this morning around AI and mental health and well-being, and in particular is very much for a mixed system of MATs and local authority schools, and that is being launched on the 30th of June, and we've had significant input into that, not just as a DBE, but also what it means for our schools and the children that they serve. I've mentioned already around the carbon net zero, with the schools that are in scope for that, and in many ways trying to move schools away from perhaps focusing very much on the big ticket items of air source or ground source heat pumps, which tend to sort of attract the headlines, to much quicker and easier low hanging fruit, for example, LED lighting and insulation, which enables them to respond perhaps in a more measured way to that challenge, rather than getting hung up on expensive pieces of kit, which may or may not be affordable in the short term. And then really exciting news, the National Professional Qualifications. This is a framework of qualifications which has been in place for some years. And in the past, we helped support schools and school leaders through doing something called the CPQH, the Church of England's Professional Qualification for Headship, delivered by a number of our schools. But we have been asked to become a delivery partner for that, to support already existing practice within the diocese, to ensure there is a ladder, a leadership ladder, for our aspirant leaders across the diocese, right through from middle leadership to senior leadership to headship, and then beyond to executive leadership. And the great news about these is, for the moment, they are all free at the point of delivery. And in fact, there is a degree of subsidy for smaller schools, which often find it difficult to release staff because of cover implications. And it's great that we're already in the early stages of working to ensure that all of our aspirant school leaders and current school leaders have access to high quality professional development, so they can really serve the needs of their schools well. And then, of course, it's interesting, Bishop Allen saying we run a tight ship. We do. I think every year I've turned up, we've had to reduce our staffing complement by a small amount. And that's not because of poor financial management or anything like that. It purely isn't simply because of the challenge of inflation and obviously reduced DFE funding. The way that we managed to do that is by utilising a really effective head teacher colleagues, particularly who provide advisory work. And we continue to obviously utilise those into the future to ensure the advice that we're giving to our schools and the support that we're giving to our schools is current and relevant and continues to equip them for the challenges they face ahead. Next slide, please. And then finally, I suppose, a lovely image there. I mentioned about our ecumenical schools. This is the other one. This is at the other end of the diocese from Windsor. This is up in Milton Keynes. And that's the Reverend Mike there lighting the fire at Pentecost for the celebrations there. Christ the Sower Ecumenical School is an academy. It actually is an ecumenical school together with the Methodist community and the community church. And hopefully what I've said this morning and what Bishop Allen has said this morning has lit your fires in terms of questions and ideas, and hopefully it's not too much of a conflagration as you now put your questions to me. Thank you for your attention thus far this morning.